I'm not a very practiced speaker, and I'm a little nervous. So if you all will bear with me and keep your expectations low, we'll make this as painless as possible, and we'll try and get through it. We might even have some fun. I thought we could take a minute to get to know each other. I don't know many of you in the room, but I assume that you're here because you have a passion to help people who have put themselves in the correctional facility legitimately change their lives. As for me, I'm Jason Duncan. I work for the Missions Department of Fellowship Bible Church. I go to school full-time, pursuing a degree in business. I am a recovering addict and alcoholic. I'm the father of a 7-year-old son who is handsome and smart, and by God's grace has gotten all of my best qualities, and I'm sure the few bad qualities he got from his mother. These are all things that are a part of who I am, but I am one thing more. I am number 656597 of the Arkansas Department of Community Corrections, and I served my sentence right here in this building. And tonight I'm here to tell you a story. My hope in telling you this story is that you'll be renewed in your passion to help people who place themselves in the correction system. So let me start with a brief history of the things that I've come to understand have contributed to my path in life and ultimately to being imprisoned. I was raised in a military family, and we moved like clockwork every 3 to 5 years. And this had both positive and negative. Sorry. This had both positive and negative effects on me. I'm highly adaptable. I am very independent, and these things have served me well in my life. But I also lack any deep roots. I don't have any long-term relationships. I don't have a home. And the only support system I ever had was my core family, my mother, my father, and my one younger sibling. Around the age of 11 or 12, my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a debilitating disease, and my father, who was active duty in the Navy, was out to sea at the time, as he was for about half of any given year. So I had to grow up overnight and assume responsibility for the things that my mother couldn't do any longer. I didn't realize it for many years, but I started to develop resentments about this. Really, I just wanted to be a kid. A couple years later, we moved from California, where I had spent the first half of my life, to North Carolina. And so here I was, the new kid in school, once again, with the added pressures of culture shock, of going through puberty, of trying to figure out who I was, and with heavy responsibility at home. My father was unable to rise to the challenges of my mother's disease in a noble manner, and he started pursuing a master's degree and working a second job while active duty in the military. And really, it was, for all intents and purposes, to run from us. He ran from us in every way possible without downright abandoning us. So it takes no great stretch to imagine what happened next. My parents got divorced. So on top of all the pressures I just mentioned, the only support system I'd ever known began to crumble and fall apart. My brother and mother moved to Chicago, my father and I stayed in North Carolina, and I dropped out of high school. Now, this was a momentous change, but something more important happened in my heart. I decided that I'd had enough of responsibility, and that from that moment on, I would pursue only what seemed pleasurable in the moment. And so I did, for more than a decade. You see, I was lacking some things in life. I had no compelling vision to reach for. I had no higher calling to inspire the inherent nobility that lives within every person. I had no one to speak into my life, to encourage me, or to call me on my crap. My only model to emulate was a bartender named James, who seemed to have everything that I thought would bring happiness. But since no one had ever told me what happiness was or how to go about achieving it, I was left stumbling around in the dark, guessing at what was important in life. And I guessed wrong. So this is the background. Oh, I'm sorry, let's get to paragraph. So I spent the next 10 years or so getting drunk, getting high, and getting laid. I developed a taste for adrenaline rushes of all sorts, particularly street racing. And this destructive lifestyle led me further down the path of addiction and criminal behavior until I was completely entrenched. And this is the background that led me to Fayetteville about 8 years ago. I tell folks that I came there from North Carolina on an extended vacation, but the truth is I had just lost my job for theft. I was behind on the rent. The police were looking for me for vehicular debauchery, and I had burned so many bridges that I had to get out. Unfortunately, no matter where you go, there you are. So the geographic change didn't change my lifestyle. And there was a guy I worked with and partied with who stole a purse from work one day, and the girl in the ID whom the purse belonged to looked enough like my sister-in-law that she could write checks. So they went on a 3-day shopping spree. I went with them for some of the purchases. The detectives brought me in and questioned me about it, and true to the code of the streets, I pretended I didn't know anything about it. The detectives told me if they found out I knew more than I was saying, they would charge me along with everyone else, and they kept their word. In short order, I was convicted of second-degree forgery. Since this was my one and only felony offense, the judge was generous to give me 3 years of probation, which, if I had completed successfully, would have resulted in my record being expunged. However, I was deep in my addiction and continued to use. For 3 months, I reported to my probation officer, and for 3 months I failed urinalysis tests, until finally he told me if I failed one more, I'd be going to prison. So I left. I absconded from Arkansas and went back to North Carolina, where I lived as a fugitive for 4 years. I left behind a young married pregnant woman, pregnant with my child, without the slightest bit of remorse or a second thought, and truly forgot about it over the next few years. Towards the end of my fugitive career in North Carolina, I finally hit bottom. I had fallen in love with a girl who represented everything I wanted and thought would save me, and who I fully intended to marry. But because of my addiction, I lost her. And not only that, but in a week's time, I had lost both my jobs, both my houses, wrecked my car, which was my prized possession, and found myself sitting in jail for the millionth time, and there was no one willing to bail me out anymore. I was completely heartbroken. I was devastated and destroyed. I remember very distinctly sitting on the concrete floor of my cell, sobbing like a 12-year-old girl, just trying to figure out where I had gone wrong in life. Eventually, I ran out of tears and reached this numb, disconnected state that you may be familiar with if you've ever felt deep sadness and morose. And out of sheer boredom, and from a lack of any other options, I opened the Bible randomly, and it fell open to Deuteronomy 28:30. And this verse reads, "You shall betroth a wife, but another man will ravish her. You shall build a home, but you shall not dwell in it. You shall plant a vineyard, but you shall not eat its fruit." This verse describes the curses of the Lord, and when God speaks to you, there's no denying it. And this was one of those moments. In that one verse, I saw all the events of the past week. My betrothed was with another man. My homes were gone. And my vineyard, all my plans, all my attempts to build a life were gone. So in that moment, I realized that God is very much active and alive, and that He moves in our lives in a very personal way, and that He speaks through His Word. I also realized that I am not fit to run my own life, that all my best laid plans always fail, and that I needed someone more qualified to run it for me. In that moment, I took steps 1, 2, and 3 and fully submitted to Christ as my Lord and Savior. But I wasn't done yet. I got out about a week later, and the first thing I did was buy some beer and some weed. I went back to the only life that I knew. But I did start doing one thing differently. I started praying, primarily for God to help me move away from my addictions. I knew that I needed to change, but I didn't know how or what. So over the next few months, I started thinking that maybe if I did one thing right, everything else would fall into place. And I decided to go to college. I went through the process of applying for financial aid and admission, and I was 1 week away from registering for my very first semester of classes when I was arrested again, and God began to answer my prayers. Now, I had been arrested several times during my stint as a fugitive in North Carolina, but for whatever reason, whenever Arkansas was contacted to let them know there was a fugitive in custody, they always decided that I was too far to bother come getting. Well, for some reason, this time, they decided to come get me. So I spent 3 months in jail going through the trial process. I was baptized during this time and spent a great amount of time studying the Bible, fasting, and praying. And my spiritual journey began with begging God to save me from this, to restore me to my possessions and my freedom. But by the end of that time waiting to go to trial, that prayer had changed to save me, But if it's your will for me to go to prison, then I trust your plan is better than mine. Well, it was his plan for me to go to prison. So I was sentenced to 2 years. But I was given the opportunity to come to the Department of Community Corrections to take place in their 9-month cognitive behavior modification program. And if I completed this program successfully, I would be released early and could finish my sentence on parole. I took this path in the hope of gaining the tools needed to combat some of my addictions. I had been in prison for about 6 weeks when I was called to a meeting with about 50 other residents and told that we had the opportunity to pilot a new program which was unique in the country and would allow us to attend college on the campus of Arkansas Baptist. 10 of us out of 1,500 or so in DCC. Not very good odds. But nonetheless, this seemed like a sign from God to me. Just a few months ago, I had been trying to go to college, and here was the opportunity to start right on time, despite being in prison. So I volunteered, and I prayed that if it was God's will, that He would see it through, which He did. But there was a catch. Part of the deal was I would have to attend AA meetings, and I would have to take take part in a class called Men's Fraternity, or the Quest for Authentic Manhood, which provides a biblical foundation for what it means to be a man. I was able to acquire a sponsor through the outside volunteers that come into the AA meetings here. I was able to acquire a mentor through the Men's Fraternity class, all while still imprisoned here. I was also able to complete a semester and a half of college and maintain a 4.0 GPA. A high school dropout with a 4.0 GPA in college. So let me kind of pause here for a second and give you a little bit of a high-altitude view of what was going on here. Through an unprecedented partnership between religious, state, and educational facilities, I was given some very specialized opportunity to change my life. Through the program here at DCC, I was given the opportunity to dry out, as well as gain the tools necessary to maintain a sober life upon my return to the community. Through the volunteers and programs offered by Fellowship, I was given a vision for manhood and a higher calling and purpose that had been missing in my life. And not to mention the spiritual guidance and teaching that helped me solidify my faith. And through the opportunity to start college, I was started down the path of development that will help me break the chains of poverty, which I'm still in, by the way. They will help me break the chains of poverty that often lead to recidivism. More than this, however, through the combined effort of all three entities, I was given a plan and a real chance at a life that far exceeds the one I had known, both in quality for myself and the ability to contribute to the community in which I live. I was given hope and a track record of success and a network of good, caring people who made it possible to maintain the success even after my release, and who have continued to invest in me to this very day. Now, this was really just the beginning of what has been an amazing journey, and on March 29th, I will celebrate 3 years from my release from this facility. You know, not that I have anything against it. And honestly, I could tell you stories for hours of how God has shown Himself in my life since that day, but I won't. Let me just hit some of the high points as I draw to a close. I have continued my educational endeavors and am now pursuing a degree in international business with emphasis on Mandarin Chinese and a minor in strategic communication. I just want to see them fit it all on one diploma. I've been able to return to this same unit and teach men's fraternity, the same class that was so instrumental in my life, and with the same team of guys that taught it to me. I'm also blessed to be working for the church that has invested in so much in me and that I love very much. And I found out about my 7-year-old son about 8 months ago. And thanks to very special people in my life, I've been able to rise to the challenge of being a father, and am blessed to be able to see him regularly despite distance and demands on my time. I've been able to rebuild relationships with my family. I was able to move my mother from Chicago here to Little Rock. And as with my son, I never could have done it without the support and encouragement of good people who are personal blessings in my life. And I'm not going to say any names, but she's sitting over there. I'm also a residential volunteer at Hidden Creek Development Center, which is a faith-based transitional house designed to dovetail with the program they operate here at DCC. And we are blessed to be seeing lives changed and people successfully integrating back into the community. Through my very personal experience, my work with transitional housing, and my work in the recovery community, I've become intimately familiar with the challenges that face people coming out of addiction and coming out of a criminal background. And the simple fact of it is, most of us don't make it. But I've discovered that the 1 in 5 or the 1 in 10 that does make it, who truly experience life change, make the struggle and the hardships and the disappointments completely worth it. And so I hope that in hearing my story tonight, you have been encouraged and affirmed, because I stand as that 1 in 10 because of the people in this room. But if this story has given you heart, I would ask that you not tell me about it. I already have a bit of an ego problem as it is, and it's not my purpose or hope in coming tonight that you would tell me how great I am or how well I'm doing or how much my story has touched you. Here is my hope. Some of you, like me, are believers in our God, and I hope that my story has reminded you of the things that you were once imprisoned by, how you have been set free from those things, and that this leads you to worship. Because at the core, my story is the gospel story. That God loved us when we were his enemies and sought us. That he is good to free us from the prisons that we make for ourselves. And to raise us up as new creations, capable of leading lives that glorify him and benefit those around us. Now, perhaps some of you don't know this Jesus that I proclaim, and if that's you, then I hope my story has brought to mind the things that still keep you imprisoned and brought you to the place where you desire to be free and dare to hope that you can be, because in Jesus you can. And that is something that I would love to talk to you about. Thank you, and God bless you.